morning, everyone. Hi, welcome to the Politico Speakeasy, the final day, and wow, what a crowd. Thank you guys so much for being here this morning. I'm Christina Gonzalez. I'm the executive producer of Politico's events for Europe, and we appreciate you spending our morning with us. We know that you are here because we have an incredible guest lined up to start off our day. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up my colleague Zoya Shevtovlovich. She is going to introduce our very special next guest. So give them a round of applause.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us on day 3 of the Politico Speakeasy at GlobeSec. I'm Zoya Shevtovlovich, Politico's chief EU correspondent and also the host of the Brussels Playbook podcast. Subscribe if you haven't already for more of this kind of quality stuff. Joining me on stage today is a man who almost needs no introduction, Radosław Sikorski. He is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning.
Let's start with whiplash, Trump whiplash. We've seen a pretty spectacular week when it comes to the defense of Europe, with the Trump administration first saying it was going to be pulling troops out, then threatening to pull troops out of Germany and Poland. Now they're saying, no, actually, we're going to rotate troops into Poland. How can a country like Poland, which is so close to the US and has always had this strong friendship, how can it read these messages from the Trump administration?
I think there may have been some miscommunications while President Trump was in China, but all's well that ends well. It looks that not only will we have roughly the same number of US troops, we might even have some more, and we are also building up capabilities, both US capabilities in Poland and Poland's capabilities. We took delivery of our first F-35s yesterday.
I mean, that's a bold commitment to the transatlantic relationship, but the problem is that how is it possible to plan in advance when you've got this kind of seesawing action from the US? What does that do when you've got such long lead times for things like F-35s, for any sort of equipment? You need procurement chains are long, you need time. I mean, can you rely on the US as a guarantor of European security at this point?
But think of how confused the Russians are.
Is that the grand plan? Is Donald Trump doing all of this to confuse Putin?
The GRU are going nuts.
Are they? Because we at Politico published a diplomatic cable that we've seen from Poland where we saw descriptions of feelings of bewilderment, genuine distress in Warsaw at these reports of the troop pullouts and back in again. I mean, has this seriously damaged the relationship on that level, particularly because we know that the Poles were not told that this was coming?
No, this is just a hiccup. We've had such turbulences before. You know, I signed the missile defense agreement with Condi Rice, the Bush administration. The new Obama administration changed the technical specifications for the system. That was a hullabaloo too. But now the missile defense base is operational, and it's a Polish-American success.
Speaking of European security, Ukraine has been fighting a war for more than 4 years now. Where is that war going? Do you see it ending in the near future, or is this going to be a huge war of attrition that goes on and on and on? And is Europe prepared for that kind of war of attrition?
It is a war of attrition, and it has its ups and downs. Wars are never linear. It's never one side winning from day one till the last day. The Russians initially achieved some inroads, but Ukraine made gains and pushed them out of the Kherson area, even made incursions into Russia. Until the end of the winter, Ukraine was in difficulty because of the attacks on civilian infrastructure, and also Russia was gaining territory. And now, again, Ukraine looks like it's on the move. Ukraine is gaining more territory than losing. Russia is losing more men than can be recruited. and the deep strikes are seriously affecting Russia's ability to refine oil. At the same time, the Russian economy is beginning to suffer. Remember, they made money on the first year of the war. That's no longer the case. So Putin should realize that he's in trouble. The problem with dictators is that they usually realize that they're in trouble too late. I was saying yesterday, but I really think it's striking. Would you have said 4.5 years ago that by now Putin would still be fighting in Donbass and that he would be panicky about possible Ukrainian strikes on Moscow during the victory parade? Because I wouldn't have had that foresight. And it shows you how much stronger Ukraine's position has become and how much weaker Russian position has become.
Do you think that when Putin said the other week that maybe it might be time to start wrapping this up, do you take that seriously? Because Putin says things all the time, he throws things at the wall and some things stick and some don't. Are we to read that as a genuine indication that maybe he does want to get things finished?
You're absolutely right that Putin cannot be trusted. Putin has a border treaty with Ukraine, signed by himself and ratified by himself. He told us, these are not my men, the green men in Crimea. He categorically stated publicly and to our heads of state, I have no intention of invading Ukraine, right? If he wants to end the war, he can do it in 5 minutes with one phone call to Gerasimov. Get out. So by their deeds, you shall judge them.
Do you think Europe should actually be sending someone for talks with Putin? This is something that has been boiling around for years. There was a lot of criticism that Emmanuel Macron got for talking to Putin early on in the war. Do you think now is the time for someone from Europe to pick up the phone or indeed make the trip? And if so, who would that be?
There are important developments in this area. So the US Secretary of State stated yesterday on the margins of the ministerial in Sweden, beautifully prepared by the Swedes, that the US is taking a pass on mediation. And he was warning us that, look, we have other fish to fry. And so this is, of course, good news for Europe in the sense that we have proven that Ukraine will not capitulate because we are helping them. We are paying for this war since the beginning of last year. And this year it's 98% us. And it's also our security that is at stake. So it is actually quite tempting to say, well, maybe Europe should negotiate it. But I think we should be careful with this. We've just had a good discussion with President Peter Pavel on the margins of GlobSec. Because let's think of historical parallels. The Soviet-Finnish war was ended by direct negotiations between Stalin and the leaders of Finland. And the most important issues are all Ukrainian concerns. We don't want to be seen by Ukraine as people who put pressure on them to make compromises. We should stick to our principles that we will support Ukraine, whatever they decide is good for them. And so we will help them defend themselves, and then we will create a path for them to join the European Union. And remember, Ukraine and Russia have been negotiating through back channels all along. They had these various paths. The only one that's been workable and has brought results so far over the 4 years is the one devoted to mutual exchanges of prisoners. But initially they had these other paths of negotiations. So if Putin is serious, he can reopen them.
At the moment, it does seem like momentum is with Ukraine. And there is a lot of support that's coming from the Baltics, from the Nordics, from the countries that have experience with Russian aggression themselves. But there is a sense in some parts of Europe, when you look at some of the parts that are more removed from that front line, that, look, we've got pensions to pay, we've got problems with our economy. There is a sense of antipathy towards continuing to fund Ukraine as much as it takes at times. I've detected this in conversations.
Britain has not been occupied by Russia and yet has been magnificent in supporting Ukraine. Countries like Portugal, Italy are actually quite forthcoming. The only people who are entitled to be tired by this war are the Ukrainians. And we've extended the money. Ukraine is provided for 2 years in budget terms. Putin needs to decide whether he can continue for another 2 years. We should stay the course.
Do you think that the European Union as a whole has the gravitas, the kind of that feeling of a big player, a key player on that global stage, that is equal to that sense of the United States, the impact that a Donald Trump kind of saying something to Putin? Does the EU have someone like that, or does it have the gravitas to be able to stand toe-to-toe with Putin?
No, it doesn't, for constitutional reasons. You're comparing a confederation with federal states, or, as in the case of Russia, a dictatorship. So no, in our system, power is not concentrated in the hands of one man or woman. We find it difficult to coordinate our positions. So we sometimes look pathetic. But I think Putin also misunderstood how democracies worked. And when we set our minds to something, when we lose trust in a foreign leader, we can be remarkably consistent. And he has clashed against our consistency, because I think we understand the stakes. It's not just about Ukraine. It's certainly not just about Donbass. It's about Ukraine's geopolitical orientation. It's about Ukraine's freedom or otherwise to join the West. And it's also about Europe's own position in the global distribution of power. If Russia wins this war, Russia will be the third pole, in addition to China and the United States. If Ukraine wins, and Europe, with Europe's help, then clearly Europe, with Ukraine in it, will be the third pole. Don't ask me which I prefer.
You've said that, you've explained what you think Putin misunderstands about democracy. What do you think Europe misunderstands about Putin?
I think we are much better informed about him than we were before this war. You know, some people had illusions about transformation through trade. And we've relearned old lessons that with a political culture like Russia's, with a state ideology that is repressive at home and expansionist abroad, you need a mixture of firmness and compromise if need be. But we should now be at the firmness stage so that we can make a deal with a future Russia, perhaps after Putin, and hopefully bring her into the family of nations once she stops invading neighbors.
Do you think that's possible for Russia, given the history? I mean, you've lived through it. You've lived under communism. You've lived under the oppression. Poland has a long history with Russia, and Russia keeps invading. So can Russia be brought in?
It's difficult because let's remember how Russia started as a state. The Muscovy Principality was for 250 years a tax collection mechanism for the Mongol horde. And this is how their political culture developed. They won competition with other Slavic princes because they were the most cruel in extracting value from their own population. And then they started growing, and the more land they took, the more enemies they had, and the more enemies they had, the more threatened they felt, and so it goes on until under the Soviet Union, in my part of the world, we had a joke. What is a secure border of the Soviet Union? It's a border that has Soviet soldiers on both sides of it.
Well, I was born in Ukraine, so
Right.
I know the feeling.
Right. So, and you know, they had their chance when the Soviet Union collapsed, but the moment that Putin started having Andropov as a national hero rather than the anti-Soviet dissidents, I knew that it was going in the wrong way. So the trouble with Russia is that there are a peaceful European democracy-minded people, but the proportion is smaller than in the rest of Europe. We should always encourage them when they try, and they only try. There are only ever reforms in Russia after a lost war. So my argument is that Russia should lose this war, not only for the sake of Ukraine, not only for the sake of Europe, also for the sake of Russia, because this would be the only chance for them to truly realize that the empire is over and that their chance to become influential and admired is to develop their own land and their own nation, of which they have plenty. I mean, come on, you know, how many is it? 11 time zones, and they don't have enough land?
So it's not a problem of land. I'd like to move to a question of Polish politics. We've had reports that the US Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Landau, instructed the State Department to approve a visa for the Polish ex-Justice Minister Ziobro. He's wanted in Poland over the alleged misuse of public funds and the deployment of Pegasus software against opposition politicians. He has fled to the United States from Hungary. What is the Polish government's understanding of what happened there? And do you view that as political interference?
Yes, we do, and I have personally communicated to High Representative of the US government our displeasure, because he's facing 26 criminal charges. Just to make it precise, in Poland we have a system whereby if you get fined in the criminal justice system, the fines go to the justice fund. And the purpose of setting up this justice fund was to use money from criminals to give sustenance to victims of crime. Good system. And Mr. Ziobro used this fund for, as you say, buying this invasive Israeli software, which was then used to spy on members of the opposition and on journalists. And he used it to reward, to help his political allies from his faction of the PiS party to win elections, and he was even trying to create a media center for his sub-party within PiS. Now, that's misuse of public funds in any country, and he needs to face the charges. He's technically still an MP and a deputy chairman of the main opposition party. His job is to be in parliament and voting. And he has now, in our view, gained a journalistic visa under false pretenses. He's not a journalist. And he's already misusing the journalistic visa because he's openly saying in social media that he's going to be touring the United States organizing Polish communities. That's not a journalistic assignment, is it?
So are you going to seek extradition?
Extradition is another process. And we have an extradition law with the United States signed by Zbigniew Ziobro.
Well, that's lucky.
So we will certainly act according to that procedure. And remember, these extradition requests go both ways. The US wants some criminals from us as well. But the first thing is, of course, whether he's a journalist, whether he's entitled to that visa.
And so have you had any signals, any communication from the US on this? Have they indicated, is this the position? They will keep him in that country, they will not extradite him, or are they open to a conversation?
Well, we've made our communications, and the United States is recently quite tough on people who break immigration rules, aren't they? So I hope they are tough without political favor.
I'd like to ask you also about your relationship with the president. He's been vetoing a lot of the efforts of your government to reform, the reforms that the EU has asked for. How can you get around that? Is it possible, or are you just hamstrung with this president?
We envy our Hungarian colleagues who have just gained a constitutional majority. We have a system like the Roman Republic, which had 2 consuls with identical powers. And in our system, the president is popularly elected, is basically head of state for representation, but does have the veto power, as you say. And this particular president defines the presidency as a way of increasing his prerogatives rather than exercising them. So, you know, the president signs various state nominations. And in most of them, the custom hitherto has been that that's just the formal ending of a process. And this president is saying that he has the right to refuse. We think it's unconstitutional. We have a lively political culture.
Minister Sikorski, that is excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for those in the audience, also those tuning in online. Next up at 10 a.m., we'll be hearing from Admiral Michael Rogers, who'll sit down with my colleague, Chris Lundy. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here.